182 thousandths of a second. That is the margin at the end of the closest finish this sport has produced between two teammates. And it happened because one of them was told to move, and did. Hold that number, because a decision measured in less than a fifth of a second went on to change the rulebook of Formula One twice, and it is the exact decision the current Ferrari team principal has just refused to make. Here is what happened, told flat, with nothing added. The 12th of May, 2002, the Austrian Grand Prix at the A1 ring. Rubens Barrichello took pole position and led comfortably into the closing stages. Ferrari asked him to hand the win to Michael Schumacher. He did not do it. Coming out of the final corner of the final lap, he lifted, and Schumacher went past to win by 182 thousandths. Schumacher had already won 4 of the first 5 races that season. He led the championship by 21 points. It was the 6th round of 17. The crowd booed when he took his helmet off. He was booed again on the podium, and he pushed Barrichello onto the top step in front of everyone. Wherever you are watching from, put your country in the comments, because that list has got genuinely strange in the best way, and I read all of it. Subscribe while you are down there, because this exact question comes back at Monza. Now, the part almost nobody gets right about that day, and it matters for everything that follows. Ferrari broke no sporting rule. Nothing in the regulations prohibited team orders in 2002. The team was entitled to ask, and the driver was entitled to comply. The fine that followed was for breaching podium protocol, not for the swap itself. Part of it was paid immediately and part was suspended. So the sanction had nothing to do with the racing, it had to do with the ceremony afterwards. And that gap between what was legal and what the public would tolerate is what actually drove everything that came next. Let me put the logic under the light, one question at a time. Question 1. Did anybody inside Ferrari think it was wrong at the time? Jean Todt, who ran the team then, has been remarkably candid about it since. In an interview with the Italian newspaper La Stampa, he said he should not have said anything to Barrichello at all. The arrangement had been agreed in advance, that if Barrichello was ahead after the pit stops, he would let Schumacher through without making a mess of it. Barrichello agreed to it. Then he stayed in front. Todt says he called him 50 times on the radio, repeating it clearly, and Barrichello moved at the last corner. Question 2. Does Todt regret it? He used the word. He said he was repentant because, with hindsight, it could have been avoided and Schumacher would have won the championship anyway. Question 3. Then why did he do it? He answered that too, and this is the sentence that explains every team principal who has ever made this call. He said he would have regretted it more if he had lost the title by a couple of points. Question 4. What did the sport do about it? At the end of that season, after consulting fans and convening an FIA working group, the governing body banned team orders that influenced the outcome of a race from 2003 onward. Question 5, the one that gets skipped. Did the ban work? Now hold that thought, because the answer arrived 8 years later from the same team, the German Grand Prix 2010. Hockenheim. Felipe Massa was leading. His engineer told him on the radio that Fernando is faster than you. Massa let Alonso through and Alonso won. Team orders were illegal at that point. That was the rule Ferrari's own actions had created. And what Ferrari received was a fine of $100,000. The World Motorsport Council later reviewed it and could have stripped Alonso of the victory, or docked the team points, or imposed a larger penalty. It did none of those. It confirmed the steward's fine and left the result standing. Alonso was 31 points ahead of Massa before that race, and there were 9 rounds left. Both drivers still had a mathematical shot at the title. And at the end of that year, the article prohibiting team orders was deleted from the regulations entirely on the grounds that it was impossible to police. Teams had simply moved to coded radio messages. And the phrase from Hockenheim was so transparent that it proved the rule could not survive. So follow the chain, because it is genuinely remarkable. A Ferrari decision created the ban. 8 years later, a Ferrari decision destroyed it. The rule existed for exactly as long as it took the same team to demonstrate that it could not be enforced. Now compare that with what happened 3 weeks ago, and be careful, because both positions hold up. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton finished 5th and Charles Leclerc 4th, 1 place and 1 point apart, with Kimi Antonelli on the podium stretching his championship lead over Hamilton to 50 points. Hamilton is Ferrari's championship contender. Leclerc is 4th in the standings. Asked why he had not intervened, Fred Vasseur said it would not have been fair to Leclerc, who had driven a clean race while Hamilton had been penalized. Set that beside Todt. Todt's reasoning was that the championship justified the instruction, and that losing a title by 2 points would have hurt more than the outrage did. Vasseur's reasoning is that the driver who drove cleanly keeps what he earned. Both men are describing the same trade. They just weigh the two sides differently, and here is the difference in circumstance that makes it a real comparison rather than a cheap one. Schumacher's lead was 21 points with 11 races left, and Todt says he would have won anyway. Hamilton is 50 points behind with 12 rounds left. If anything, the case for intervention is stronger now than it was then. So if you were Vasseur, you had two moves and both cost real money. Make the call, and you inherit the entire history I have just described, in the country where that history is remembered most vividly, with a driver who has just signed a long contract. Or refuse, protect the garage, and hand points to a 19-year-old in a season you are supposed to be fighting for? Which one do you take? Like this video if you make the call, comment if you hold the line, and I will read the split next time. Subscribe while you are there. Then the timeline moves, and here's the detail that closes the circle. When the Massa case reached the World Motorsport Council in 2010, the man presiding over the FIA was Jean Todt. The same Jean Todt who had been Ferrari team principal in 2002, whose decision produced the ban in the first place, and who has since said he regretted it. The governing body that had to judge Ferrari for breaking the team orders rule was led by the man whose Ferrari created that rule, and the outcome was a fine that changed nothing, followed within months by the rule being deleted. I am not suggesting anybody did anything improper, and there is no evidence that they did. What I am pointing at is a sequence, dated, on the record, in which the same person appears at both ends of the same regulation. Now the numbers, because this is what the principle actually costs. 182 thousandths in Austria, a championship that Todt himself says would have been won regardless. In exchange, a ban that lasted 7 full seasons, a fine, a booed podium, and a phrase that people still quote 24 years later. In Hungary, 1 point separated Hamilton from Leclerc. Ferrari took 22 points from a weekend where they arrived as favorites, and Hamilton left 50 points behind the leader, with a maximum of 316 still available. 1 point today. 182 thousandths in 2002. Neither of those numbers is large. Both of them were, at the time, the entire argument. There is a structural reason this keeps happening to this particular team, and it is not Italian temperament. Ferrari is the only team that has been in Formula One since the beginning, and it is the only one that is treated as a national institution rather than a company that goes racing. That means every internal decision is made in public, judged by a country, and remembered for decades. When Mercedes ordered Valtteri Bottas aside for Lewis Hamilton in Russia in 2018, on a day the Finn had done nothing wrong, it was controversial for a fortnight. When Red Bull's instruction to Sebastian Vettel was ignored in Malaysia in 2013, it became a story about two drivers. When Ferrari does it, the sport rewrites its rulebook. Now the strongest case against everything I have just said. The comparison may simply not hold. In 2002, Ferrari had by far the best car, and the championship was effectively decided by June. Ordering a swap there was banking a certainty. Vasseur is not sitting on a certainty. He is 50 points down against a driver who has been on the podium relentlessly, and Mercedes have had at least one car up there at every race this season. Spending a precedent that lasts years to buy 1 point in a fight you may not win is arguably terrible management. And Todt's own conclusion supports Vasseur rather than contradicting him. Todt says the order was unnecessary and that he regrets it. The lesson he drew from Austria is the one Vasseur is following. That is a strong argument, and I think it is probably right. So here is where I land, and I want to be exact. I do not know what Vasseur weighed in that garage, and he has never framed this as a break with anything. Nobody at Ferrari has said this is about history. That framing is mine, and I am telling you it is mine. What I can put in front of you is documented. This team asked a driver to yield a win in 2002, and the sport banned the practice. This team did it again in 2010, and the sport abandoned the ban. This team gave the same instruction to Charles Leclerc twice in 2019, in Austria and in China. And in July of this year, with a 7-time world champion second in the championship and a clear opportunity, The current team principal was asked and said no, and named fairness as his reason. That is 4 occasions where Ferrari faced this choice, and one where the answer changed. It does not prove a philosophy has shifted, because 4 data points across 24 years and 3 different team principals is not a trend. But asking whether the oldest play in this team's book has been taken off the table is a legitimate question. And Jean Todt, of all people, has already answered it for himself. And 182 thousandths is what survives all of it. Less than a fifth of a second handed over on the exit of a final corner by a driver who had earned the win. It cost Ferrari a fine, cost the sport 7 years of an unenforceable rule, and cost the man who ordered it a public regret he was still explaining decades later. Vasseur looked at that inheritance in July and left it where it was. Whether that is principle or arithmetic, only he knows. What it cost him is measurable, and Monza will start measuring it. Zandvoort is next, then Monza on the 4th to the 6th of September, at the circuit where Ferrari's second engine upgrade arrives, and where both cars should be quick on the same afternoon. If Hamilton and Leclerc finish split by 1 position again in Italy, the question gets asked a second time in front of the only crowd that remembers Austria properly. So predict it now. Does the oldest play in Ferrari's book come back at Monza, or is it gone for good? Say it below, subscribe so you are here when we check that against what actually happens, and hit like if you want that breakdown the day it does. Until the next one.